Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. I don't think we've got anyone here in the middle of the night. So welcome. And this is our second session together. And before we jump in, let's take a moment for a few minutes of grounding and arriving. So taking a moment to get settled, letting go of whatever you just came from, wherever you came from, whatever you were doing, and taking a moment to land here. So I invite you, if you'd like to stay seated, you can do that. Or if you'd like to stand up, I'm going to stand up and just guide us through a couple minutes of grounding. So notice what feels most comfortable or most accessible for you in this moment. And we're going to start by making connection to your feet. And so noticing your feet on the ground, or noticing the bottoms of your feet if your feet are not on the ground. Noticing if there's a sense of pressure on the bottom of your feet. And then moving your attention up your legs, through your ankles, up into your calf muscles. Noticing your knees, moving up your legs to your thighs, your quadricep muscles, and into your hips, your buttocks. And noticing as you move through these different parts of your body, if there's any kind of movement or a little shake or a wiggle. And into your belly, your abdomen. Noticing your low back, your spine. Moving your attention up into your chest, into your shoulders, and down through your arms, your fingers. Noticing your neck, your head. Noticing the way your head sits on top of your neck. Coming back to your shoulders, your spine, your hips, your legs, your knees, down into your calves, your ankles, and your feet, and down through your toes. And taking a few breaths and moving that air from the top of your head all the way down to your toes and back up again. And inviting a little movement A little wiggle, maybe swaying, shaking, stretching. Whatever feels good right now. Or maybe that's stillness and remaining in stillness. And then taking a look around your space. And gently bringing a little movement into your spine as you look behind you. Taking in your space. And then making your way back to the screen. And if you'd like, sharing a 1 or 2 word check-in in the chat box. How are you feeling? What are you noticing? What's alive for you? Just noticing where you're at. Chilly, relaxed, awake and tender, grounded, feeling calm. In my head, tense, pleasant sleepiness, anticipation, jet lagged, slightly apprehensive, curious, satiated, relaxed and balanced, quiet, calm. And I'll add, I'm feeling ease. So welcome everyone. We have, let's see, we're missing a couple people today. And Shari, we missed you last week. So I wanted to say hello and give you a chance to introduce yourself if you'd like. So we all took a turns saying our name, pronouns, where we are in the world, and what's one intention that you have for this class. And you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm at my friend's and her dog is having a barking attack. I'm Shari. My pronouns are she and her. I'm in Israel. I apologize for not attending last week. I was in Japan and it was 1 a.m. and just a little, it was difficult to start a call at 1. And my intentions for the course, for me, it's really, I know a bit about the Wheel of Consent and your work and Betty Martin's work and understanding boundaries, understanding yes and no is something that I didn't really grow up with. And I understand it from a intellectual point of view, but not from a somatic point of view, and not from actually understanding what I really want when I want it, and feeling safe and comfortable with that. And so I really wanted to dive deeper into this work, practice it more, get more comfortable with it, in all relationships, whether that be with myself, with friends, with family, with any kind of sexual relationship.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. And did you have a chance to catch up with the recording?
I did. I watched the recording from last week. So I did see the introductions from the group and some of the background. And then I also watched Betty's video on domains and limits, as well as the pre-work on your video on the pre-work. So, and went through the documents you sent.
Great. And any questions about any of our group agreements, or can I get your agreement on those?
Yes, absolutely. You can get my agreement, and I did read through them. And in general, I've spent a lot of time in I live mostly in Thailand, where group work and respect for others and confidentiality is a big part of kind of daily life. So absolutely, I respect and agree with all the agreements.
Great, thank you. All right, wonderful. So last. Can you hear me okay? I just got a weird message that my sound switched to my iPad, my earpods, which are not near me. So as long as you can still hear me. So last week in our introductions, we shared some of our identities or social location. And then we sent out this document to everybody as well, as a way of starting to map your own identities. Some of these identities we can look and see, and I'm in a white body, and I appear to be female identified, and there are other identities that you might not know by looking at me. And so we can make assumptions about people's identities, and then we can just be oblivious to some of those identities. And so I just wanted to say that as we move through this class, while we won't be explicitly going into a lot of detail around this, it is implicit and it's here in the room, and it impacts our ability to notice what we want and speak up for what we want. It impacts our experience, whether we're aware of it or not. It impacts who we might feel comfortable partnering with. And so I want to remind you around the opportunities for choice, and noticing yourself, and noticing whether you want to step into a practice, if there's someone specific you might want to do that with, or someone specific you don't feel comfortable doing that with. And those are all choices that you can make throughout this class. And a reminder that Bob is available for partnering as well. And so you can always request that. And so at any time, if you have a specific request around partnering, you can send that to Susie, and she will take that into account as she's pairing people up. And then an additional invitation that we offer when we send people into breakout rooms, because we're not in a room and we're not moving around the space and you're not approaching people to pair with, what we often invite is, when you move into a breakout room, to take a moment to pause and see who you're with, and to check in and notice, is this someone that I feel comfortable partnering with? And whatever the reason, trusting if there's a no, and not needing to explain it. And that might be, I'm not comfortable doing this with you right now, or I need to ask for someone different or for something different. And you can always come back to this main room. And I know that can feel really edgy. And you have full permission to experiment with that. And maybe you experiment just for the sake of experimenting, even if you feel totally comfortable with this person. And so the other side of that is also noticing if someone says, I'm a no to this practice with you, or, I need to switch partners, to not take it personally. And in this space, to see what that's like to be able to hold that with another person. And so I want to just add that reminder and invitation. And it can also feel like a really big edge. All right. So today, we'll have a few minutes for discussion around this video on domain, boundary, and limit, and some of the key takeaways from that. And then we're going to move into opening up our capacity to feel sensation in our bodies, and a conversation around pleasure. And what is pleasure? What does that mean? What's that like to access that in our bodies? And so I wanted to open it up for questions or reflections about this video on domain, boundary, and limit. And I'll just add a couple things to open it up. And it's coming back to the definition of each of those words. And so this teaching or concept came about to better understand this idea of boundaries. And the words boundary and limit are often used interchangeably. And you're welcome to use those words interchangeably. And within the Wheel of Consent, we use them quite specifically. And so we wanted to provide a definition for that. And so to understand this idea of boundary, it's first important to understand what is in our domain. And so our domain is what we have a right to and a responsibility for. And so things that fall within our domain include our thoughts, our beliefs, our desires, what we want, our pleasure, our body, our feelings or emotions. So these all are things that we have a right to and a responsibility for. These are things that people, they certainly try. We try to influence what other people want or how people feel, but ultimately nobody can tell us what to feel, how to feel, what to think, what to do with our bodies. That's a choice that is for each of us. And the edge of our boundary is, or the edge of our domain is our boundary. And so if you imagine your domain as a house, the fence around your house would be your boundary. So this is the delimiting line of what's yours and what's outside of that that's not yours. And then our limit is what we're available for or not available for in any given moment. Our boundary does not change. What's inside our domain is always inside our domain. We're always responsible for that, and we always have a right to that. So the boundary does not change, but our limits can change based on who we're interacting with, what our relationship is, what our agreements are, what kind of mood we're in. And so for everything that falls within our domain, we have a limit. I have a limit around who has access to my body and when. I have a limit around how many of my thoughts and ideas I share with others. And that's based on the relationship, the trust that I have with others. I choose how much of my emotional life to share with others. So those are the ways that we're using those different terms. And we'll talk a lot about limits and setting limits and noticing limits as we move into the dynamics of receiving and giving. So questions, reflections, things you're curious about. Yeah, Tegan.
I don't think I received the email with this on.
Okay.
So I've just been taking notes, but was it like you filled it out or
No, it was a video.
it was a video? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't receive an email this week.
Okay.
So
Well, we'll check your email and make sure you get it, and then you can come back and watch it.
great, thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else not get it?
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, Shari.
one of the things that I thought was interesting, and maybe we'll talk more about this from the video, is how she talks about, if I have a feeling I don't want to feel, or if I have a desire but I'm afraid to express it, how I put it on the other and have them feel it instead of actually feeling it myself or dealing with myself. And I thought that was quite powerful, because I realized, like, oh, I do that a lot. And that, I don't know if you'll talk about that more, but I found that to be something that was, yeah, quite important to to at least my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the relational aspect of this. So we all have our own domain, and then we come into contact with other people who have their domain. And so if you when I do this in person, I actually put I'll have a couple of volunteers come into the center and put a rope around each person on the floor. And so if you imagine, you have your domain, and imagine this rope around you on the floor. And so this space inside the rope is your domain. And then you have another person sitting across from you, and they have a rope around their body, showing the boundary around their domain. And so when we come into connection with others, what happens with our domains? In intimate relationships, oftentimes there's a merging of domains. And so you can imagine like opening up your rope and joining it with this other rope, which actually becomes a codependent relationship or enmeshed relationship. We have all kinds of ideas of how we're supposed to interact with each other. We have unspoken agreements, which I think of as like these telepathic agreements. Like, if you love me, you would know what I want and need, or you should be able to guess in any moment what I need, or we try and guess another person's needs, or we just automatically go into serving someone else and their needs. Anybody had this experience in relationship? Tell me I'm not alone. So, so another way of thinking about it and literally closing the loop on our domain is imagining a third rope in between the two. And I think of this as the third domain, or the we space of relationship. And this is with any relationship. It could be with family, with friends, with coworkers, with an intimate partner. So there's this third domain, or this we space. And within that, we each choose, what am I bringing into that relationship? How much of myself am I sharing? What parts of myself do I bring? What are the agreements we have around that? What agreements do we have for how we're going to interact with each other? And the more explicit we can be about that, the clearer and the cleaner that relationship becomes. And what often happens is, if I don't feel comfortable actually stating, here's a want, here's a desire, will you give this to me? Or may I do this for myself with your permission? What can feel safer is to try and push our wants and needs into the other person's domain, to try to get them to want it. And that might be, oh, do you want to have dinner tomorrow night? When actually I want to have dinner with you. And it's not as scary to say, do you want to have dinner? Instead of, I'd really like to spend time with you. Are you available to have dinner with me? Would you like to have dinner with me? Or don't you want to take a vacation? And so these are subtle ways of putting what we want into someone else's domain. And it's a way of avoiding the vulnerability of really stating and owning, I have a want, I have a need, I have a desire. Are you available to meet me? Are you available to give that to me? And so this is a way of starting to notice and to clean up those relational dynamics. So part of that is noticing what we want and asking for it. And part of that is noticing our availability for someone else's needs or wants. And being able to say no. Being able to say, I'm not available right now, but maybe later. Or I'm not available for that, but perhaps something else. And one of the things that Betty talks about in this video is the importance of our no. So last week we started feeling into our yes and our no. And our no is really important when it comes to speaking up if someone crosses our boundary and crosses into our domain. And so a no is a way of letting someone know, this is my space, this is my domain. You're stepping into it, and I don't like that, and that's not okay. And so if someone's just dipping a toe in, it might be, hey, I need you to step back. Hey, that's not your responsibility. It's not up to you to tell me what to think or do or say or put on my body or eat or how I should dress or how I should do my hair. It's not your business. And if someone persists and steps in further or further into our domain, our no might need to get a little louder. Back up. Stop. So our access to our no is really important and lets people know they can take responsibility for their domain. They know what's in their domain. And that's really the key. If we don't know what we have a right to and a responsibility for, if we don't know that these things are actually within our domain, then it's a lot harder to speak up and say no. And there are a lot of things that can muddy that line, that boundary line. If we've experienced some kind of trauma, if we've experienced assault, that can make it harder to actually realize, hey, wait, I get to have a boundary here. This is me and this is you. And so part of this process is reestablishing, this is my domain and this is my boundary and this is the line. And I actually get to have a no. So that was a lot more than your question about relating. Andre.
Robin, a question for you. So just like, so when it comes to physical intimacy, whether sexual or it's just a cuddling, you mentioned about we have our domain, so that's our body and our emotions, and the other person has, and if there is one coming inside the other, there's a codependency. When it comes to intimacy, physical intimacy, again, sexual or not, how is that explained according to that? Does intimacy falls within the third body within the relationship, or do you allow the person to come into our domain? How is that explained?
Mm. Yeah, I think of that as being an agreement that falls within this third domain or we space. So if I am interacting with someone physically, we would start with a conversation around what is it that we want to do together? Do we want to have physical intimacy? And what are the limits around that? So is it cuddling? Are we keeping our clothes on? Are we taking our clothes off? Are we being sensual? Are we being sexual? And all based on all of that, it's first noticing, well, what's my personal limit here? And then being able to communicate that. And then finding out what is the other person wanting and what are the agreements that we have around that. And so I can give you a couple examples. When I'm engaging with another person physically, we would start with a conversation, and that might be, may I kiss you? Or may I hug you? May I put my arms around you? If it's like one specific thing I want, then I'll ask for it. Or I'll want them to ask specifically for what it is I want. If we're going to be engaging in a longer term physical relationship, or maybe it's a more fluid physical connection, then upfront we would talk about, I would say, you have permission to touch me in the ways that you want to touch me, and I'll take care of my limits around that and let you know. And can I have the same permission to touch you? And then a second agreement might be, if there's anything specific that I want from you, I'll let you know. I'll ask for it. And I'd like you to do the same. And so we're taking responsibility for our desires around physical touch, and it's a broader container or agreement that allows for more flow and ease, that I don't have to say, well, can I kiss you? And now can I put my arm around you? And now can I move my body closer to you? And now can I lay on top of you? So it's like, can I have access to your body? And maybe that's for an hour, maybe that's for a night, maybe that's until we decide we want to change our agreements and take that back. So those are some of the ways that I start to create those agreements for physical touch, intimacy, when it comes to my body and sharing my body with another person. And it creates a lot of ease and a lot of freedom within those agreements to interact and to feel safer for me. So a big part of it is creating a sense of safety in the nervous system, so we actually can relax with each other and be at ease with each other. And so those are agreements that support that, based on the kind of interaction we want to have. Does that help?
It does. It does. It sounds super. It sounds great, and it's super healthy as well. It's just mind blowing. So I'm gonna put this out there for you and for everyone else. So is it fair to say then? I mean, I'm learning this now. I'm 50 change just learning this now. So is it fair to say then that a lot of our interactions tend to be based on assumptions? For example, you meet somebody, you give them a hug, or you go to a pub, you meet somebody, start talking, go home, and things evolve, but there's no conversation, just evolve. It sounds like a lot of our interactions is all based on assumptions. Is that a fair statement?
I would say yes.
Oh my God, no, thanks so much. It just blew my mind. Thanks, Robbie. Yeah, that clarifies a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Stephanie.
My question is sort of similar, but it's more related to like thoughts and emotions. And I'm having trouble actually just phrasing it, but I want to know something similar to that. Like you're interacting with someone and their language and your language don't seem to match. And it feels like they're pushing past my boundaries. And when I say I don't like it, I get a lot of pushback from that. And then a lot of what seems like retrospective justification or something. Can you talk about my domain and their domain and our domain when it comes to emotions and thought?
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll share from what I'm hearing you say. I'm going to share what's coming up for me, and then let me know if I'm on the right track, or I might need a little more information or like an example from you. But what comes up initially is there's a similar way. So if we have a hard time asking for what we want, it can feel easier to try and sneak that into someone else's domain. When it comes to emotions and our emotional responses, our emotions are in our domain. So we have feelings, we can have really big feelings. And if someone else is uncomfortable with our emotions, they might try and change our emotions so that they feel more comfortable. So, for example, anger is a big emotion that a lot of people have a hard time with. Or grief or sadness is another one that people have a hard time with. Actually, joy and pleasure is another one that people have a hard time with. Like, these emotions can create a feeling of discomfort in another person. And so if we are not comfortable with someone having emotions, then we might do things or say things to try and change the emotions in the other person. So that might be, oh, you shouldn't feel sad, or you shouldn't feel angry. Or what can I do to make you feel better? Or they just like move away. Like, oh, I'm gonna give you space to feel what you're feeling, which is really like, I'm really uncomfortable and I need to move away. Or, what can I do to make you feel better? It can also be like, I'm really uncomfortable right now. And so how can I change your emotion to something that I feel more comfortable with? And again, it's like, we aren't really taught how to be with emotions, and how to be comfortable with that, and how to hold and support other people in their emotions. And so I'm not sure if these are like, these examples are some of the things that you've experienced. But if it is, and if it's not, give me some more detail. If these are the kinds of things that you're experiencing, then like just taking a breath and pausing and say, you know what? I just need to be with my feelings right now. Can you be with me? And if you can't, then I just need some space. Bob, you want to add something?
If it's okay, and then again, Stephanie, do come back to Robin, but just to add in, obvious things like systemic stuff. So it's cultural. So people assigned female at birth, and there is sexism and there is patriarchy, and so a lot of the time we're taught, we might have had a sense of our domain when we were little, but it was overridden, or we were gaslit about it, or we were taught that we were being rude, or we weren't allowed, or we weren't being polite. There's just a whole array of stuff where basically we're called discourteous for actually trying to talk about our own domain, which we do actually have a right to. And that is done in such a variety of ways. from so many different angles over years. And at some point, many people, I think, but if we're using I statements, because that's in the group agreement, I can certainly say that I didn't even sort of know what my domain was anymore. I just could feel that things were happening that didn't feel okay to me. And actually, it's this video that I think, like, this domain boundaries limits, Robin, and oh my gosh, I can't find you. Susie, there you are. Sorry, that no, well, no, that this is like one of my favorite. I panicked then, Susie. Where's Susie gone? It's one of my favorite parts of all of this work. I use this every day in so many of my interactions with relationships I have. And even when I can't address it in a way that I would want to, so I'm thinking of my parents right now, at least I notice it, and I know, I'm just knowing what's in my domain and what isn't in theirs for them to tell me about me. Just even knowing that, when I can't even verbalize it in a grown-up way that I would like to and can in other relationships, brings me some peace, because I know my domain now. I know what belongs in it. I know when people are entering it when they shouldn't be, in a somatic sense. And I think this changes, if that was an issue and people didn't, I'm not saying for everyone, so again, back to me, it's changed everything for me. And it won't be that I can always speak to it in the moment, but that doesn't matter, because what I will do is feel it. I'll feel when people are overstepping, and just a somatic knowing of what is mine and where my boundary is, even that brings me a lot of peace. And then obviously over time, more and more, I'm allowed to speak up for what I want or to say no. And those things have come automatically from having a much clearer sense of my domain and my boundaries, and knowing it's okay to have limits. So a lot of what happens is we're really taught on purpose to not know where that boundary is, and we get gaslit about it. And that's why, part of the reason why this work is so important, and why we have to unlearn so that we can learn, you know. I hope that's okay to put that in, Robin.
Mhm.
The things that each of you said make a lot of sense to me, and they're actually things that I know, but the things that happen that confuse me are not specifically related to, I don't think they're specifically related to either of the things. So could I give you an example?
Please.
My partner's in Australia right now, and we're supposed to be going to a course in Northern California in August, and he's going to fly in probably to San Francisco in time for the course. And so he said, do you think you could drive to San Francisco by yourself? And so I said, do you need me to pick you up from the airport? And he said that no, he doesn't, just engage your brain. And I thought, what is this engage your brain about? Because it sounds to me like, and I live in Washington State, really close to the Canadian, like closer to Canada than Oregon, right? Really far north, and, in Washington State in the USA. And I thought, well, why would he have asked me if I could drive to San Francisco when the course is far north of San Francisco? It's in a place called Upper Lake. Why would he, like, I couldn't understand why he wanted me to drive to San Francisco, except that that's where he's flying in. And so when he said, engage your brain, I said, ouch, because that felt like a dig to me. It felt wrong to me. It felt like some kind of false accusation, like you aren't, whatever. Reading my mind is what it felt like. But that's not my job. Like, reading his mind is not in my domain. He needs to communicate what he's thinking and feeling, right? But then when I asked him for clarification, or what I thought was asking for clarification, I felt like I got hit with this confusing thing out of nowhere. And then when he said, well, I'm just telling you to engage your brain. And why are you saying ouch? What is your ouch about? Because ouch is when we feel like our feelings are hurt or something's not right. We say that to sort of like put a pause in the conversation. And then he came back with just engage your brain. And I said, if you're going to just keep going back to that, I need to be done with this conversation. And I closed the Zoom. We agreed to close the Zoom room. I took 20 minutes and got myself centered. And then I called him back. And then we worked out a lot of agreements, I guess, where I asked him for clarification, what does that mean? And he said, I want you to take a pause between your ouch or between your thought and getting to your ouch so you don't assume bad intent on my part. But also I was saying to him, why don't you just explain why you're asking me the question you're asking me? Because it would have been clearer if you asked me, could you drive to Upper Lake by yourself? Not, could you drive to San Francisco? That's where the confusion came. But he would not acknowledge that the confusion stemmed from something unclear that he said that was unclear enough to prompt a confusing response.
Hmm.
And then when I said, I feel like I'm doing all the emotional labor in this relationship, he said that he thought he was doing all the emotional labor in this relationship. And I don't know where he gets that, because to me, it feels like I really am the one who has to always apologize first, always say, okay, we've gone off the rails. We need to try to figure out, how did we get off the rails and how are we going to get back on? Like, how can we reconnect and try to like maintain the health of our relationship? It's just so, it's like agony for me to have to deal with this.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds confusing.
Okay, so it's not just me. It's confusing.
I'm confused by the conversation. Yeah, and I think part of coming into clarity is these clear agreements and figuring out like what is a clear agreement.
I asked him to agree to not say engage your brain because it
Yeah.
triggered me. But then he said, but whose material is that? And I said, clearly it's my material, and I'm working on that in my co-counseling sessions. Like, I'm working on my material around that kind of thing, false accusations and hurtful statements, but it's still okay for me to ask you not to make hurtful statements.
Yeah, and that statement of engage your brain is a way of reaching into your domain.
Okay.
How I hear that is you should use your brain and figure this out.
Yes.
That's a stepping into your domain.
Thank you.
So an alternative to that would be, can you tell me what you're confused about?
Okay.
It sounds like we're not meeting each other here. Here's what I requested. Here's what I need. Or here's the idea, this was the idea I had. That would be fully stepping into his domain and owning what he said and seeking more clarity.
That is pretty much what I asked him. Like, what are you thinking? You're going to fly into San Francisco, but you don't need me to pick you up? Then who's going to pick you up? And how are you going to get to Upper Lake from San Francisco?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and another way of approaching that could also be, so you're trying to figure out what he's doing and what he's wanting, and you might pause and step back. Can we just step back a moment and talk about where are we going to meet and how are we getting to the retreat? So here's the easiest way for me to get to the retreat center. What's the easiest way for you to get to the retreat center? Are we good getting ourselves there and meeting there?
Okay.
So I don't need to figure out what you need. You don't need to figure out what I need. Let's talk about what we both need. And then do we need to make some arrangements around that? Or does someone have a specific request?
Okay.
Thanks for bringing a live example.
Thank you for answering it.
Yeah, and this stuff can get really tricky. Like, what's mine? What's yours? How do we take it apart? How do we get clear? And so sometimes just like taking a pause, let's zoom out and see what's happening and what are we both wanting and needing here.
So when I feel that ouch, it's probably because somebody has tried to reach into my domain.
That it could be, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think the ouch is one that I use often, and it's a way of just like, sometimes I feel something in my body and it takes time for me to find the words to understand, like to put words to what just pinged in my body. And so ouch can be a way of like marking, like, oh, something just happened. I felt it in my body. I'm not quite sure yet how to talk about it. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I just need to name, like, I felt something. And so it can be, ouch, I need to come back to this. I need to take a pause and figure out what's happening, and then can we talk? All right. Speaking of talking and feeling, we're going to move into more feeling and less talking. And so I'm going to invite you into a practice called waking up the hands. And this is how many are familiar with this practice? Okay, a few people. So this is a practice in connecting to sensation in our bodies, and in particular in our hands. And so for this practice, you will need a couple small objects that you can comfortably hold in your hand. And then a place where you can sit back. And preferably where you can lean your head back. So sitting back in a chair, leaning against a wall, and then you'll need a cushion that you can place in your lap. And so take a minute and find yourself a cushion, get comfortable, and find an object. We'll start with one object that you can place in your hands. And so our hands are used to being productive, getting work done. They're used to doing with some purpose. And this is a practice in simply enjoying sensation on your skin. Slowing down enough to notice sensation on your skin. We're often moving so fast that we don't even notice. So it's a practice in slowing down, in connecting to our body, and increasing our awareness of our body, particularly when it comes to taking in sensation. And so the first thing is to get really comfortable and support your body, supporting your trunk, your neck, your core, so that you can relax and lean into this. And then taking one of these objects in your hand, you'll notice that the first thing that happens is your brain engages, your meaning making engages. So perhaps giving this object a name, a purpose, maybe even a story. There might be a memory attached to this object. So our brain very quickly gets activated with, what is this and what's it used for? And oh, I remember this time when I did this and I saw this object. So we're going to set that aside and come into an exploration of sensation with this object. And so I first invite you to notice the tactile information about this object. So the tactile information includes the temperature, So noticing if this object feels warm against your skin or cool against your skin. And then you might notice the texture of this object. And so to do that, you may begin to slowly move your hand across the object, or move the object around in your hand. Noticing if it's smooth, if it's rough. What kinds of textures do you pick up? Is it fuzzy? And then you also can notice the shape or the form. Might have smooth edges, might be round. There might be some hard edges, sharp edges. So feeling for the shape, the texture, the temperature. You might also notice the weight, how the weight feels in your hands. And then slowly allowing your hands to be curious. So moving into this curious exploration as you explore various ways of touching your hand with this object, of feeling the object against your hand. And noticing the different ways you can experience sensation on your skin. So you might explore sensation on your palm. You might notice what the sensation is like on your fingertips. You're noticing what it feels like between your fingers. So seeing what you can find with different parts of your hand. And whatever speed you're moving, I invite you to slow it down by half. And notice your breath. Notice if you tend to hold your breath as you're feeling. And at any time, if it feels like too much, if it's too intense, you can take a pause. So stopping any movement. And you might just rest the object in your hand and see what that's like without movement. And if you want to keep moving, you continue. You might move between one hand and then the other. And notice what that's like to feel with your dominant hand versus your non-dominant hand. And as you're feeling, you might notice an emotional response. And that's welcome too. And let's take a pause there. So coming into stillness and setting that object to the side. And taking a moment to notice your hands. Noticing any sensation moving through you, through your hands or any other part of your body. And slowly opening your eyes if they're closed. Noticing the light in your space and the colors. And let's take a couple reflections before we take a break. So we'll just take the next 5 minutes and take 1 or 2 reflections of what you're noticing in that practice, what you notice about yourself. Yeah, Stephanie.
I was using this blue stone. It has rough patches and smooth patches, and for a long time it was interesting to feel, and I just was like exploring different parts of my hand with it, and I got to this spot on the back of my hand here, and even when I moved on, I could still feel it there. It was like there was a shadow of it still lingering there, and it was painful there where it was not painful anywhere else, and it's smooth, it's not sharp, it does not do damage. And even when I went to the other hand, I still felt this shadow of pain here. And I wondered, why do I feel this lingering shadow of pain, and why will it not ease? And I remembered that when I was 18, I had a really severe injury to my right hand, that this was the focal point. And at the time I was in a situation where it was not safe to feel anything, emotionally feel anything. And so I realized that I have never processed the trauma to this hand, and that I have to do about that injury, because that emotion is still living in that spot in my hand.
Thank you. And you've just touched on one of the ways that this practice actually invites healing in our body. So there are lots of ways that we have cut ourselves off from feeling things because it was too painful, because it wasn't safe to feel, because it wasn't allowed. I was told it wasn't okay. We were shamed. And so we stopped feeling. And this practice invites us back to a place to feel and to heal those experiences around sensation, around touch. And so I invite you to step slowly into it. And we'll come back to this practice again, and we'll invite you into this practice over these next few weeks. And we invite short increments of time so that we can dip our toe into the experience and then pause and take a moment, integrate, catch our breath, reflect, and then step back in. And so just notice what supports you right now in coming into your body and being here. And thank you for sharing that. Carrie.
What you just said, Robin, really resonated for me, because as I was sitting there, the tenderness around, oh wow, what else am I missing out on because I'm rushing through life in a sort of disassociated way in order to multitask, etc. That the beauty of this object, you know, that I'm missing out on all of these feelings and sensations, and so that really came up for me. And what does that mean generally, you know? So
Mhm. That's a great question to continue reflecting on. What am I missing out on when I'm moving fast through my day, through my life? What happens when I slow down? What do I notice? We'll take Shauna and then we'll take a break.
So my hands, I likened it to the way my dog acts when I let her off leash at the dog park. like it was the same sensation of like, oh, we're free, we get to do whatever we want now. and the invitation to not be attached to brain and like efficiency and you're on duty, and just like, oh, we can go sniff whatever we want and touch whatever we want and pee on whatever we want. It was just this kind of like joyful freedom and permission that I felt in being given that. So yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you. All right, let's take a 7-minute break. So we'll come back at 17 after the hour. And I'll put on some music if you want to move your body during the break. Check in and notice what you need right now. Water in, water out, movement. And we'll be back at 17 after. Oh, okay, welcome back. So we're going to move into another round of waking up the hands. So find another object, a different one, that you can bring into your hands. And then I'll invite you to get comfortable again. And notice if there's anything you can do to get even more comfortable than you were before. So finding a place to sit where you can lean back, or even laying down on the ground. Bringing this pillow to your lap. And so having the pillow in the lap, and you can see Bob. Is it okay if everybody looks at you, Bob? Great. So you can see Bob's leaning their whole body back. Back is supported by the wall, neck is supported, and then a cushion in the lap to rest the arms. So your arms, you don't have to hold your hands up to feel either. And then bringing this new object to your hands. So noticing new object, whole new set of data. So notice the meaning making, and we're going to put that aside. And then coming back to exploring the tactile information of this object. So using your hands to feel for the texture, the temperature, the shape of this object, the weight. Noticing your breath. You might experiment with having your eyes open or softening your gaze, or if it feels safe and comfortable, closing your eyes. And bringing all your attention to your hands. So noticing if the thoughts pop in, just bring your attention back to your hands. And noticing how much you want to feel in this moment. Do you want to explore with all of your hand? Or maybe you just want to explore with one tip of one finger and see what you notice there. You might find one part of your finger that feels really pleasant. And you want to just hang out there. So allowing your hands to be curious, to wander, to explore. You might play with pressure. Noticing if there are preferences. What if you feel with very light touch? Or maybe you press this object into your hand or into your palm. Notice if there's agitation or boredom. And see if you can welcome that and be with that. And reminding yourself that you can pause at any time. You can stop at any time. Noticing the speed that you're moving. Notice what happens when you slow it down even more. Noticing how much sensation you want to take in. And noticing if there's a place on your hand when you touch, if it feels pleasant. And slowly coming into stillness, setting that object to the side, taking a moment and noticing your body. Noticing how your hands feel. And then bringing your attention back to the screen. And noticing if there's a stretch, some way your body wants to move. Maybe a yawn. And any reflections this time around? What did you notice? If there's anyone we haven't heard from yet. Yeah, Kathleen.
Hi. Yeah, so I have a real live injury that's only an hour old. It's a burn on my finger, and it's quite painful. And how I negotiated this, I was doing math. I was like, okay, 50% on this hand, and And then it was like, okay, but it's only one finger. So then I can like 90% enjoy it and 10% pay attention to the pain. And then it was like, but it's actually just the tip of my finger. So then it was like, okay, is it between 1 and 5%? Like, it's so interesting because I think truly in my own life, like I feel I've experienced so much pain that I just like negotiate it into this really small space of like allowing for pleasure. So when I actually allowed there to be more space for pleasure, like it's not that, it's just, I negotiated it down to 1%, like, and I got to have so much more by just paying attention instead of just like, boom, just like shrinking it to this thing that I had to protect.
Wow. Any resonance there? Yeah. How do we get distracted from the unpleasant, uncomfortable, painful? And how does that restrict our capacity to feel what feels good, to allow ourselves to feel pleasure? And can we have both side by side without ignoring or denying one or the other? But they can actually coexist. Yeah, thank you. That's profound. Other noticings or reflections? Did anybody notice more sensation in your hands the second time around? Yeah. Thumbs up, thumbs neutral, down. Got some neutral, some up. Yeah, so as you engage in this practice, and I call it a practice because it is something to continue to come back to again and again. And the more we engage with this practice, the more we open up our capacity to feel and to take in sensation. And so oftentimes when we are moving our hands and using our hands, we're sending a signal from our brain, do this, move your hands this way, wash the dishes, type on the computer, drive your car. So we're sending the signal out to do something, to be productive. In this practice, we're reversing that flow. And this is where the slowing down becomes really important. And so we're inviting you to feel an object in order to take in sensation. So it's moving into the body and exploring what that's like. Exploring, is there a place that feels good, that feels pleasant, that feels enjoyable, that feels soothing or comforting or playful or sensual? And allowing ourselves to feel that without any other purpose but to feel. And I'm curious how many had an experience of like, yeah, that felt really nice, or that felt soothing or comforting. Yeah, so this can be a very down-regulating practice. So when I say down-regulating, it can be soothing to the nervous system. So how many felt more relaxed or feel more relaxed now than before the practice? How many feel a little bit tired? So as we slow down, we move into this relaxation response. We move into our parasympathetic nervous system, this place of rest and digest and relaxation. And it can also bring our attention to feeling tired, particularly if we're used to moving about, being productive, getting lots done. As we slow down, we become more aware of, wow, I'm really tired. So you might notice that in this practice. How many had some kind of emotional response of, might have been sadness or tears or anger or frustration? So it can also bring up an emotional response. And we'll send you a video to watch this week. Actually, I'm going to see if I can find a video of the pleasure piece as well to send. So we'll send you a couple of videos with some of the theory behind this practice, to give you a little more context as you explore it, things to notice, things to pay attention to as you continue to engage with it. And for now, I'd like to give you a chance to have a little more reflection time in pairs. And so we're going to move into listening turns. And so each person will get 5 minutes for a listening turn. And in your listening turn, you can reflect on, let me just copy these questions. What are you noticing in this practice? How is it for you to feel for your own pleasure? So in this practice, we're feeling and having this experience of something that feels good, that feels enjoyable, and it's not for anybody else. It's all for you. You don't need to give anybody an experience of pleasure. Nobody's giving you an experience of pleasure. It's something that you're experiencing in your own body. And you're choosing in this practice of, how much do you want to feel that? What do you want to explore? What feels good on your skin? And so noticing what comes up for you around that. And so those are some questions to reflect on, or anything else that's coming up for you right now. So take a moment to notice if you'd like to pair up, or you might want to go into a solo space and do some journaling, or sit in reflection on your own, or take a break for that time. And if you have a specific request, or if you'd like a solo breakout room, please send Susie a message and she'll get that set up for you. And so it will be 5 minutes each. Once you get into your room, you can decide who will go first. You'll first check in. Am I willing to do this practice with this person? And if you're both a yes to that, then decide who will go first. And then we'll give you a prompt when to start, when we'll start the 5 minutes, and when to switch over turns, and then when that second turn is finished. Any questions?
Will the prompt be in the breakout rooms too?
I think if you open up, once you get into the breakout room, if you open up the chat, it should still be there. They're always changing how stuff happens in Zoom, but as far as I recall, you should still access the chat. All right. So we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. And let's take a couple reflections. If any noticings that emerged in your reflections that you'd like to bring here to the main space? Anything surprising? Yeah, Kathleen.
Yes, I expressed to my partner that this is a new relationship with touch, with myself, and that touch has really always been harmful or with expectation. It's just never been for experience, like to experience something without all loaded. And also that it feels like a new language.
Thank you. Any resonance there? Yeah, and for me, this is part of the unlearning and unwinding of patterns. And I think of this as coming back to our original language. So, how many people here have kids? And how many can remember back to being a kid? So, if you watch an infant, they crawl around, they pick stuff up, they rub their skin, they feel it, they rub their mouth on it, they put stuff in their mouth. So the way that they make sense of the world is through touch and through bringing in sensory information from their environment. And then at some point, we're told, don't touch that. That's dirty. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't touch yourself. So it's our natural instinct to reach out and feel up our world. And then we're told that that's not okay, that it's shameful. And so we stop. And this is one of the ways that we cut ourselves off from feeling. And so in this practice, we're inviting this remembering that this is okay, that this is actually natural. And there's a real innocence in being able to take in the world through our senses and through touch in particular. And so it can feel very tender. So thank you for naming that. There's one more burning reflection before we close.
I was just going to comment, and it's interesting based on what you just said, that in many ways I feel very comfortable talking about pleasure or experiencing pleasure. But there is this thing like the question, like, how do you feel with your own pleasure or with touch, that brings me to this place of like discomfort or shyness, or like what you just said is like almost shame. And I don't remember being told not to do something, or not to touch, or not to, that's dirty, but there's this real variation between those two things. It's like, oh my God, that's such a, like, oh my God, that question, I don't like that question. It feels so uncomfortable in me, but yet talking about play and intimacy and all that is so joyful to me. So it's like this real, and what you said, I'm like, wow, maybe I was told these things, and that's why it feels so uncomfortable. Like this idea of like touch, or like, how did it feel to enjoy touch? So that
Mm.
was interesting to me.
Yeah. Anybody else notice some discomfort with any of that, or like the word pleasure? So it may not have been your caregivers. And there are cultural messages that we get around touch, around pleasure, around what's okay and what's not okay. And so these are all pieces to unpack. And so we'll send you a couple videos to watch this week around pleasure. One is on defining pleasure and kind of unpacking our experience with pleasure, how we think about it, how we feel about it. And then one is on the direct and indirect roots of pleasure. So our different access points to pleasure and how we experience it. And then we'll have a couple of practices for you to explore if you'd like. One around creating a desire list and connecting to the things that you want. And then a practice around pleasure in the senses. And so exploring what you notice when engaging each of your senses. So a lot more to notice around this. And then the home practice with waking up the hands. And so we'll send you a video around this and invite you into a daily practice of 3 to 5 minutes a day of just taking a few minutes to feel an object. So I see this comment in the chat box. I was told self-pleasure was wrong, marriage, sexual wasn't good, relearning my own touch and knowing it was okay to give self-time took a while, and exploring that. Yeah, and I'd say this is an ongoing, lifelong exploration. What is it to allow myself to explore touch, to explore pleasure, and to explore yourself as a sensual being? And how does that impact other areas of your life? So a lot of what we're talking about is noticing what we want and speaking up for what we want. And I think of that as applying from the bedroom to the boardroom, building these skills to speak up in different areas of our life and to notice ourselves as we show up in all areas of our life. So we are at time for today. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you.
You mute. We've lost your sound.
Okay, just switch to my earpods again. Can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
All right, so if you'd like to share 1 or 2 words in the chat box as a way of checking out, what are you noticing right now, or what are you taking with you from today? And I'll put on a song if you want to dance your way out. And Susie, if you could stop the recording.